teeny bit different tonight. I'm not going to sit up front. George found this awesome wireless mic so we can pick up the audience questions, and I can read the questions that have come in online a little bit easier and have the audio better for our video and our live stream. Which the videos and live streams have been awesome, getting a lot of great traffic. So please feel free to ask all the questions that you have. These three and then a couple of the other people that were switching in and out are open to anything as long as it's respectful. We're here tonight to talk about addiction, recovery, harm reduction, and how that affects the community and what we can do as residents of the community. So we'll do a quick little introduction. On the far end, we have Terrell Keith. In the middle, Jeremiah Jones. And on the end, Shane Ritter. All are here to start with to tell a little bit about their lived experience in addiction and recovery and how that has transformed and put them where they are today. So, Terrell, would you mind starting and just give a little bit of your history?
Absolutely. Can everybody hear me? Should I point it this way? Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Terrell Keith, and I identify as a Black gay male who has been in recovery for almost 4 years in April. Thank you. I was an intravenous meth and cocaine user, and I also struggled with alcohol. Growing up, I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty as far as how I got into addiction or anything like that, but the way my addiction looked was, it was born out of feeling alone, especially growing up in an area like this. You don't see people that look like me all the time. And also being, a little gay Black boy that built some complexes in a place like Fort Collins, Colorado. That's where I grew up. I didn't know something was missing until I picked up a substance. And once that hole was filled, I was like, oh, I didn't even know that was there. I'm gonna keep writing this out. So, my story looks a lot like, that pamphlet addict, right? Like it started off fun, and then as time went on, I started losing relationships, losing money, losing freedoms, and I went to my first inpatient treatment center at 19 years old. I thankfully am part of a family that could afford something like that. Well, we couldn't really afford it, but we could pretend to. And I went through that for the first time, 30 days, and later on that same year I went back. I relapsed shortly after, and I went back to the same treatment center. And after that I stayed sober for about 4 months. That was back in about 2017. And decided to go back out, blah, blah, blah. And I stepped back into recovery for the final time, April 11th of 2020. I was in complete meth psychosis. I had been arrested, and that is really the day that I decided to surrender to whatever I needed to do in order to get better. And part of my recovery journey was a 12-step program that I'm still involved in, and living in sober living. I lived in sober living for the first year and a half of my recovery, and I can't even begin to describe the way that it impacted me being able to stay clean. And I use the word clean for myself. I don't use that for other people. But so 12-step, through sober living, I was able to get back on my feet. And with about 6 months of sobriety, I entered the helping field as a peer, and I worked at a homeless day shelter and helped connect people experiencing homelessness with resources that were all recovery related. So in this position, I got plugged into so many different networks. I met so many different people. It was absolutely incredible, and during that time I got to see a lot of gaps in the system and how addiction correlates with that, and I really got to see folks who are ready to treat themselves better and some of the resources that were available to them, and some of the resources that weren't in order for that to happen. So, I now work at a detox facility and a mental stabilization unit. I oversee a team of peers, and I'm able to kind of show them the way I was once showed them the way. So that is my little blurb. I'm going to pass it on to these two.
Thank you, Terrell. All right, Jeremiah, you're up.
All right. My name is Jeremiah Jones. So my little story is I was born and raised in Fort Collins. And my story is kind of different with the way I grew up. So I was raised by two addicts who are both still in active addiction. So I didn't really know a difference. I didn't know I was trying to fill that black hole until later. I was just able to, it's what I saw every day. You have a party, you could just celebrate something, we're, using, if it was a bad day, mad at your boss or anything else going on. My parents used, so I grew up like that. Also growing up in like chaos of active addiction. We were, I think I was like 6 years old when we first were evicted from our first place. We're homeless, lived in a tent for a while, which, I thought it was just a really long camping trip, until I was older and realized what it was. And that moved throughout my entire life. And so then I think the trauma from that, and then only knowing how to cope with anything was through using, that's how I went through life. I remember when we were like, I was like 7, 8 years old, my parents were throwing like a New Year's Eve party. And they're like letting the kids take Jello shots, right? And I thought that was like so cool. My parents were so cool, and it wasn't until like way later when I realized like how wrong that was and how like that was just like just showing me down a road that would eventually lead to me, broken, battered, and bruised at 35 years old. I got hurt when I was like 18, like BMX racing. This was back when the FDA wasn't really too up on the whole opiate thing, and I was doctor hopping, stealing script pads, writing my own scripts, stealing from pharmacies, whatever I could do. Because I thought because it was from the pharmacy that I wasn't a real addict, like I didn't have a problem. I just, had a medical condition. Then the FDA got wise and took it away from me. And so then I went to the streets and sought out heroin and fentanyl. That lasted about 3 or 4 years until that brought me down, and I sought treatment also in Denver. I was in there for like a month, and they wanted to do aftercare for me, which I, to be honest, was still so naive about addiction at this point. I thought that I needed to just stop doing heroin for 30 days. I didn't have a problem, right? I just needed to stop doing drugs for 30 days and I would be fine. Boy, was I wrong, so I got out. I did outpatient treatment, and this is kind of where my story to this professional field came, as someone offered me to become a peer. And it blew my mind, because when I was in IOP and I had heard this peer speak, and I got to see someone speaking about their lived experience in an open forum, it just blew my mind. Also, when I got into that, I was started on MAT treatment. And I did that for about 2 years, and then graduated from that, and it eventually came off. And so now I am in complete sustained recovery, which for me that looks like complete abstinence from all drugs or alcohol. And so now I just try to help people with there. I also work at a facility that helps out with resource navigating for anybody that wants to have anything that has to do with recovery, whether it's support groups, 12 steps, rehab, inpatient treatment, outpatient treatment, anything they need. And I feel like in that position, I have been able to see a lot of the gaps and trying to fill those in with resources that I know, but like what was said, some of them apply, some of them don't. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with my story.
Hey Jeremiah, can you explain what MAT treatment is?
Oh, MAT treatment is medical assisted treatment. So some of those that you might have heard that are kind of the big ones are like Suboxone, Vivitrol. What those do is, for me, they allowed me to kind of like start the process of recovery without, 25 years of using getting in the way of that. It curbed my triggers, it curbed my cravings, and it allowed me to like really dive deep into recovery, because I wasn't having those triggers and those like extreme impulsive thoughts of like wanting to use. So that's what medical assisted treatment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
All right, thanks, Jeremiah. Your turn, Shane.
Hello everyone, my name is Shane Ritter. I want to first thank you all for coming, and I want to thank Black and Blues for hosting. I want to thank the Loveland Voice for everything that they do for this community. This particular subject means a lot to me. So I'm also in recovery. I do identify as an addict, and I do refer to myself as clean. That's not necessary, right? My story is a little different. I grew up in San Diego County, very, very solidly middle class, parents who are still married to this day. It was the idyllic family from the outside. I was always a little different, so I struggled a lot with a lack of acceptance, or at least a feeling of a lack of acceptance, which can be a very common thread for those of us that suffer from addiction. It's certainly part of my story. My using started with experimentation. Started with cannabis, which I do not believe is a gateway drug, but it was the first substance that I used. Alcohol became a big part of my story, experimenting with other substances, cocaine, psychedelics, etc., and prescriptions and the medical establishment are part of my story as well. I was a very functional, outwardly functional addict for a lot of years. I did well in school because I learned well in school ways, which not everyone does. I came out here to go to CSU. I graduated from CSU in 1997 with a bachelor in English. And I went on to start a successful company. Meanwhile, addiction was growing, right? This is a progressive condition. So by the time I was in my early 30s, addiction had pretty well taken over. I lost my home, I lost my business, I lost all my things, and criminality is a part of my story as well. So I was facing 4 to 12 years in the penitentiary. That's when I went to treatment. I went to treatment for 30 days. I learned a lot there, and I did not stay clean. It did not fix me in 30 days like I thought it would. Spent about another 7 years using, and by the end of it, I was on the streets, destitute and derelict, and doing whatever I needed to survive day to day. I got clean about 10 years ago. I'm very active, thank you. I'm very active in a 12-step fellowship as well. That's what my path to recovery looked like, because there were no longer the options to fund treatment, etc. I'm very active in 12-step recovery. I try to be very active in the community for those suffering from addiction or experiencing homelessness. I have a big heart for all of that. I also sit as an advisor on the Laramie County Opioid Abatement Council. And that's all I've got. Let's open it up for some questions. I do want to say, we have a table full of Narcan over here. Thanks to our lovely friend AJ Jorgensen. Please take some with you. An addict who dies never has a chance to experience recovery.
Thank you, guys. I have a couple questions that I'll start with that came in online that we'll just get those done with. And anybody can answer this, whoever feels comfortable. Can you kind of explain how the community or Loveland, Fort Collins, whatever community that you feel part of, either could have helped, should have helped? Talk to our city councilors that are right here and maybe say what the city or the community members could do more of or do less of.
I guess I'll start. To be quite honest, I don't remember the city being involved in my recovery at all. I don't think of the city when I think about my recovery, and that might be an issue. Who knows? My recovery was other addicts loving me till I could love myself. When I think about one of my biggest barriers, or what could have been my biggest barriers to help, would have been financial, to be honest. I was actually talking to Amanda about this, about a week ago, maybe a couple days ago. And I'm a big believer that there's recovery with privilege. I'm one of those people that got to access recovery with privilege and afford these treatments and afford these sober livings. And that is where I could see the city helping the most, is financial help for folks who are ready to access these services.
Yeah, I would actually agree with that 100%. I work with the population of people experiencing homelessness, and one of my biggest barriers is with things changing, with Medicaid now being accepted at more treatment centers, I can get them in, right? But there's this gap of when they get out, where do they go? It's really hard for me to ask them to pay rent of $1,000 in sober living, right? Even if I can help out with a move-in fee or 1 month's rent, that's only a move-in fee or 1 month's rent, right? These people are with extreme needs and extreme barriers. So I see like a financial gap there too, with that in-between part. And for me, that was actually what kept me sick for quite a while. Kept me using is I was terrified to come off, right? Because I knew what was gonna happen. I knew how sick I was gonna be. I mean, I was using opiates for over 20 years every single day. So I was terrified. So that's what kept me using probably for like a year or two longer. And I was actually one of the first set of people that went through a treatment center in Denver that was accepted by Medicaid that did a medical detox, which I don't know if I would have had that opportunity through Medicaid if I would be sitting here today, because I couldn't have done it on my own. And so yeah, that's the financial barriers that I experienced.
I would agree wholeheartedly with both my friends here. Financial barriers can be steep. I think the most important thing we can do as a community is to have conversations and reduce stigma about what an addict looks like, who an addict is, what an addict is. All three of us have very different stories. Some have short beards, some have long beards, some have cornrows, But in all seriousness, the stigma around addiction is probably the biggest barrier for addicts seeking recovery that exists, and the biggest barrier for community help in addicts seeking recovery. The Opioid Abatement Council, its role, for those who aren't familiar, is we are distributing the funds from the pharmaceutical company's settlements, right? So there is some financial help coming, some amends being made from the legal cartels that profited off of addiction in our communities, but we could always do more. And the gaps that were referred to, such as getting out of treatment and having nowhere to go, so sober living is essential, and the more communities can do to support and provide sober living, vouchers for addicts seeking recovery that need to get into sober living, could benefit from sober living, is huge. Also, I think the role of our local government, state government, and even federally is shifting law enforcement's ideas about addiction. Addiction is not a crime. That's all I got.
Thank you, guys. Do you want to bring up MJ now? Are you ready, MJ?
Oh, sure.
Welcome, MJ Jorgensen.
Don't run away. Why don't you want to sit
I just follow Shane wherever he goes.
Same.
He's my buddy.
Okay, MJ, will you pull the mic a little bit closer to you and then introduce yourself as much or as little as you want?
Hi everyone, I'm MJ Jorgensen. I'm a person in long-term recovery as well. I use they, them pronouns. And I also serve as the Director of Addiction Response for the North Colorado Health Alliance. So that's a lot, and it means a lot to me to be up here with these fine folks and with Shane. Ultimately, a little bit closer. A little closer. Okay. I'm here for it. I'm here for it. So ultimately, my role looks a number of different ways, but is deeply informed by my own experience, but also the folks that I engage with every day, both in the colleague space and the folks that we serve as an organization. And so, actually, I have 26 staff on my team supporting the region that my organization serves. And so that actually is 11 counties, which is a lot of counties. But Larimer and Weld are the roots of our work, and the bulk of that staff actually live and work in our community, and over 85% of my staff are folks in recovery. What that means is that we're really good at our jobs, and are able to just differently engage with the population of folks who use drugs, or folks who are in treatment, or folks who are in recovery. And I say those things very explicitly because, as Shane said, actually stigma and shame are the two biggest reasons people don't enter treatment or enter recovery. And we know that language matters. And the research shows that if we start talking about people as people, that they will engage differently, because that reduces stigma in the community. If you want to go down a really big rabbit hole, the Recovery Research Institute actually is the mothership of all things around addiction and research, and they have all of the evidence around that language shift. So my task for you today is to shift your language as well. If you're a person in recovery, a person in treatment, the words like addict or anything like that, those are theirs or yours, right? But when we talk about other people, we talk about people. So that's one way our community can engage to change the culture around substance use. And so part of my work is to do that, and to have conversations with folks like you to create change. Because if we look at the data, we know how to do this. We just have to be creative enough to embrace it. In addition to community education like this, we do provider education, because if I show up at a treatment facility and I get treated like garbage, I'm not gonna stay, and it's not gonna work, okay? Ultimately, that means engaging providers in language change conversations, talking to them about what medication-assisted treatment does. Thank you for sharing. And also making sure they know the resources that they can support people with beyond their stay at that clinic that day. So part of our work is care coordination and peer recovery support. And so we have staff in spaces and very specifically in spaces of opportunity and coincidence and circumstance. So We have staff in our jails, on our emergency room floors, in our community-based organizations, just to try and meet people where they're at and say, have you ever thought about this? What would that look like for you? Do you want to have a longer conversation? How do we keep you safe today? Because that's the goal, is safety today, right? So on that note, we do a lot of overdose prevention work. And naloxone is a tool that everyone can leave with today. So naloxone reverses opioid overdoses. Some people will say, well, MJ, I don't use opioids. Well, the drug market is what it is. That is something we know. And there is opioids and other substances that are not opioids necessarily when we buy them, right? So just making sure that everybody knows that that is an option for us to be responders for this community issue, and we're all community members, so we have a part to play. That said, we also distribute fentanyl testing strips so people can make a consented choice to the substances that they use. They could test that substance, it could be positive, and they might still use it, and that's okay. Drug use is complex and multifaceted, and if I know that I'm going to be unwell, if I use a substance, or don't use a substance, I should say, there's a lot of barriers keeping me from that change, and we have to embrace that that is part of someone's recovery too. Ultimately, there are also over 60 naloxone vending machines and naloxone kiosks throughout the region where folks can walk up and gain access to naloxone and not have to talk to a single person. Because if stigma is in the way of you getting access to that, let's get rid of that, okay? So ultimately, all of those spaces, you can find them by going to our website. There is an adorable map that has all of the hours and spaces that those are located in. So really encourage you to do that and tell others about it, because this is a game of dominoes. And the more we know and can share, the more people will be able to take part in this change. We work very specifically to connect people into medication-assisted treatment, and I don't want to talk too long, so I'm gonna mind myself here. But medication-assisted treatment is ultimately not new. It's just differently accessible than it used to be. And so your primary care provider can actually prescribe you medication-assisted treatment, which hasn't always been the case. Additionally, they just removed the piece of legislation, or changed the policy, I should say, around providers requirements to do additional learning to prescribe medication-assisted treatment. You should note that we don't do that for them to prescribe opioids. And so it took an act of policy change in order for them to prescribe the treatment for the addictions that were caused from the opioid epidemic. And so that has again been a piece of systems change that resulted in different access for folks, but not all the providers know that, and so we're on our horses to do additional education there as well. There are an overwhelming and abundance of ways in which people can and do recover, and part of our job is, hey, you know, if medication is your route, let's do that. We have no stigma or shame around that. Substance use is a chronic condition. And if we looked at somebody else who had a chronic condition, said, hey, you don't need meds for that. If we're talking about diabetes and we say you don't need meds for that, we turn over in our grave, right? But we've begun to understand as a region that if we start actually talking about substance use disorder as a condition, as a chronic illness that has recurrence and it comes back sometimes, people can differently access care. And those are all true as well. Substances change our brain, and it takes a while for that to change as well, after we've stopped using those. And actually, the statistic for you today is the amount of craving that comes from withdrawal from meth on an fMRI MRI scan, which super nerdy of me to bring an MRI up, so sorry, is the equivalent of a baseball field after 2 years still. So if you think about the stories we've heard today, that makes sense to me, right? If we compare that to not drinking water for 2 days, and they did the scan, and they're playing sounds of dripping water in the background, and they're talking about going to a water park and drinking beverages in front of you. That's the equivalent of a baseball. So that's the difference. Think about the day you're the thirstiest you've ever been, and then just multiply that in an overwhelmingly exponential way. And that's what folks are dealing with every day. And it's important for us to know that as community members, as we show up in different spaces and say, no, we need change in these things. And here's why. Because we know better. We know better now. So I'm gonna shut my mouth.
No, that was all fantastic. Thank you. Thank you for all the work you're doing. So one thing I'd like all of you to address, and I think that you just were a little bit, MJ. So when I first created the event and posted it, I used the words harm reduction, and I got some messages like basically what is that? What does that mean? So maybe Terrell and Jeremiah, can you kind of explain how you see harm reduction working, and maybe, what areas you think that the community could do better at embracing?
Absolutely. Can y'all hear me? All right. To me, harm reduction starts with acceptance. Starts with accepting every aspect of a harmful behavior or substance use. And it's taking that and looking at the person and saying, okay, just like what MJ said, how do we stay safe today? I see harm reduction as a spectrum, all the way up to active substance use with no plans on stopping, all the way to complete abstinence. And based on the statistic that was shared earlier, I think it is a very unrealistic expectation to think somebody's going to go from here all the way to here based off of reasoning, which we all know there's not really room for logic when it comes to addiction. And so to me, harm reduction is making sure that folks can reduce the maximum amount of harm through their harmful behavior or through their substance use. And so that can look like syringe access programs, that can look like MAT, that can look like clean using supplies so that someone doesn't have to have a lifelong disease due to another disease. It looks like all sorts of things, and I think that we practice harm reduction. I think everybody practices harm reduction in their own ways that aren't even substance users, right? Putting on a seatbelt is harm reduction. We don't stop driving just because there's a risk of dying, right? It's practicality and it's acceptance, and it's the idea of not attaching morality to substance use. So.
Thanks, Phil. That was great. I actually don't know I don't know where that's coming from. I can hear it too. I can hear it too. It was like so, without beating it too much, because Terrell kind of hit everything, I guess I could just say, harm reduction for me was getting put on MAT treatment to be able to process the idea of recovery, and that was huge for me, because and now when I work with people and I'm using harm reduction technique is like Joe said, meeting them where they're at, to try to open them up to the idea of staying safe today and maybe moving towards that spectrum. But yeah, I don't know what else to say more than what was said.
No, that's great. Thank you, guys. Does anybody in the audience have questions? June? Hold on. I'm going to give you the mic.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. There you go.
That makes me nervous.
This question is specifically for Shane. I know from Facebook and from just being around that you do have a son. Did he have any, what I want to say, set an example for you that you wanted to quit? Or when was he born in the process of your trying to recover?
Thankfully and gratefully, my son has never seen me loaded. He was born after I got clean.
His birthday's this weekend, by the way.
That's true, that's true.
How old is he?
No,
He'll
he'll
be
be
nine.
nine.
He'll be nine. That being said, being a father has fundamentally changed me. And perhaps kept fuel there to stay clean, and more so to stay on the path of recovery, which to me is a constant growing process. I've got a lot of mess to clean up inside my head, and I'm still very actively engaged in that, and so him being in my life is certainly a motivation for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Danielle?
This is also kind of a question for Shane.
Talk to him anytime.
I mean, it's kind of a rhetorical question. So back in 2019 when I moved to Loveland, there was this really cool coffee shop. And it was open late, and everyone was welcome, and there was no judgment, and there were things for people to do. And I know from my experience of hanging out with friends that prefer not to go to bars or places of that nature, that especially in Loveland, there's nothing open past like 6 p.m. for someone to do as a sober activity. So I guess my question's kind of twofold. Do you guys feel like there's a gap in the community in that way? And then secondly, do you ever feel isolation or feel like lonely because it's hard for you to go out and socialize with just like people because you don't want to go to a bar or something like that?
Yeah, and just to like address some issues that we had when we scheduled this event. The Loveland Voice and a certain city councilor got a little bit of flack for hosting this subject matter in a place that serves alcohol. And, you know, there aren't a lot of options as far as welcoming business owners where they are not charging you, where they are sober friendly, they have a fantastic mocktail list, and there's just nothing open past, you know, like you said, past 6 o'clock. So we did get a little bit of flack for that, but after I spoke to people that actually have lived experience and they were okay with it, then yeah, go ahead, Lynn.
Brianna is helping to solve this solution in Loveland.
Good.
We look forward to it. Okay, you guys want to answer the question?
Yeah, I'm gonna be real quick on it, and then I'm gonna pass it back to anyone else up here that would like to speak on it. First, thank you. That was a special coffee shop. Tomorrow will be the 4-year anniversary of its closing, which was a leap year, so it's really the first anniversary. So I'm a little sad face. Yeah, still fresh, definitely. I do not feel lonely or isolated at this point. I have an incredibly rich life, specifically with other people in recovery, which is a critical element for someone finding long-term sobriety, is to find their people, right? Yes, there's definitely a gap, right? Loveland does not offer a whole lot in that regard. If anything at all. But I will say this about this event being held here. There are businesses that serve alcohol that are very friendly to those of us who don't drink. And the reality is we don't talk about alcohol alongside addiction very much as a society. We tend to see them as different. They're not. Alcohol is a super powerful drug and probably it's definitely the most widely abused drug out there, isn't it? Have to refer to my statistician over here. So that's important too, that we don't differentiate, right? That being said, our culture is saturated in alcohol. I can't go fill up my gas tank. I can't buy a candy bar or a Slurpee, right? Or walk more than 2 blocks without seeing alcohol for sale. So it's just part of being in recovery is making the choice of what I want to do.
Fast question for anybody here. Our world tends to look at things in black and white, and you can spend 30 days in an institution and you're clean and you're on your own, you're tossed out. And I'd like to hear what it takes, because to me it's a transition. You don't get clean and then all of a sudden you're a human being. Life doesn't work that way. Any experiences that you could share on once you get through the process of getting into recovery, how does it feel in the long run?
So are you asking like what long-term recovery feels like?
Yes.
Or what's necessary to get there?
Both.
Like, okay, so when we had that conversation, you said that there's a lot of the topic of housing first, house you first, and then all your problems are solved, right? Which is very simplistic. And you told me about how that's great, but also. So that's kind of how I see this question going.
100%. I really appreciate that question. I think that, I know it looks different for everybody. I know we've had a lot of conversations that are recovery focused, which I wanted to somewhat stay away from because there's drug users that don't want to stop, and that's okay too. But as someone in recovery, that's the only perspective I can speak from. I know when the first time I went to treatment, I thought the same thing that I think a lot of folks think, both drug users and people who don't use substances or use substances, quote, normally, that like after 30 days, we're cured, right? And 30 days without the substance. And I know in that time, I had a huge desire to stay sober, which is something I had literally never had before. I had never experienced what it's like to not want to use anymore, and I got out and I was using within 72 hours. In that situation, I went back to the same apartment I was living in, with the same roommate, with the same dope dealer, all the things that I got to learn, such a valuable lesson through that. That desire doesn't really mean shit when it comes to addiction, right? To me, addiction is a disease of intentions vastly being different than actions, no matter what somebody wants. So, in that example, I didn't have healthy housing, right? That was my only option. I didn't have money when I got out of treatment. And so I think a safe place to live, and not safe as in a roof over the head, but safe communally. I think having a network of people, which takes time to build, is another piece of the recipe for me personally. And community, and not just, I can only speak from my experience, and as a gay man, I didn't find identification until I kind of was introduced to this underground meth and sex world, and that was how I was introduced to substances, and that was my first time feeling like I belonged, right? And I needed that sense of belonging without substances, and I needed to be just as potent. So it wasn't until I found a crew of other girls, gays, and theys, and we didn't have to use substances for me to feel loved, and to this day, that is still one of the main reasons why I stay sober, is because I found belonging, and that's an accumulation of so many things.
Yeah, I felt the same way. I told you guys earlier, like I thought I needed to only be in treatment for 30 days and I was going to be cured. And then I got out and I was lucky that the treatment center that I went to really pushed 12-step, right? They wanted me to find a sponsor in the first 30 days that I was there, so I could get my phone back. I'll be honest, I just got a sponsor so I could get my phone back because I was still doing dirty in treatment, and so my higher power had a different plan for me, and this man that chose me my sponsor ended up meeting me where I was at, right? Loving me for who I was, as crazy as I was, and introducing me into this like community and purpose. Because when I got out, you know, it's like a cocoon, right? It's they tell you when to get up, they tell you when to go to bed, they tell you when you're gonna eat, they tell you when you're gonna go to classes. You know, like I would joke around about it as like an adult like summer camp, you know, because it was just so structured, which is what I was feeling at that time. Was that structure. And then when I got out and didn't have it, I was looking for it, I was very hungry for it. And I was introduced into the 12-step program, where I, for the first time, felt loved and like I belonged to, right? I would say I used and sold drugs for that validation, right? I wanted to be the man, right? I got the stuff, you need it, you want it, like, I had tons of friends, right? Everybody wanted to hang out with me, everybody wanted to be my friend, right? When I went to treatment, nobody was there, not a single person. And so getting out, and, you know, you hear you have to change people, places, and things, that's really hard when you don't have the resources. I also, too, had to go back home with my parents, who I told you both are in active addiction. And I think that I sustained recovery because I was really hungry for it, but I built this community of men around me that showed me how to live, showed me how to, you know, go through this life that I've been going through for 20 years as a self-centered, immature addict. My thinking was very, very warped. My perception of things, the way I dealt with normal life, just, it wasn't correct. And so today, that's how I don't do it perfect. The only thing I do every day perfect is I don't use. But I still struggle, you know, and if it wasn't for these men in this program that I like talk to every day, I wouldn't make it. Like I still have like existential crises in the middle of Walmart, you know, like just crazy things, you know, where it like snaps me back into that thinking. And so I think that's how I would say that I like felt like I belonged first, as I met these other guys that were doing what I was doing, and I to kind of go on what you were asking, like I did not feel alone. Even when I wanted to be alone and I wanted to isolate, they wouldn't let me. They were always there for me, and so I think that's what's like the biggest part of today, of like feeling like I have community and stuff, because we're all in that path together, right? When one of us falls, we pick each other up, you know, we do this together, not alone. So yeah, that's kind of.
Do you want to just share with me? I completely agree with everything these two fine folks have said, and I also had a moment that I found to be very intuitive, but something I had never thought of, that I will share, and I will do that and also say that Gina Rupp told me once upon a time, before I had found my own sobriety, my partner was sober before me, and we had just started dating, and Gina was talking to me, and she was like, MJ, you don't have to be sober, but you do have to make sure that your partner's not the only sober person in the room. That's your responsibility. And at that time, I was like, revolutionary, and also, MJ, figure it out. But I just think knowing that this is a community conversation, and folks are asking for ways they can support people, that's one way you can do that. And those people and your places and your things, that's all wrapped up in that comment from Gina.
Thank you all so much. Okay, we're gonna switch out a couple of these fine people. Jeremiah and Terrell. Let's give one more round of applause. Thank you to them. It'll be a little hard to follow all of that. Councilor Black. I'm on my desk.
I do, but I love this.
Oh, I didn't realize.
Well, Erin's making executive decisions at the end here. Like she works for the Loveland Voice or something now.
Shane promised that he was gonna be up there, and I said I was gonna throw all the hard questions to him, so.
You can't believe that.
You still can, he's come up multiple times.
He just does what he wants, you know. Just comes and goes. Okay, so just for formality, we'll introduce Councilor Black. Thank you for being here. I asked her to be here because she is on the Opioid Abatement Commission. Would you give just a short little reasoning as why, I know you wanted to be on that commission. Can you tell us a little bit about why you wanted to do that?
Yes. Thank you. Well, first of all, I wanted to be on that because I had been following those monies since the settlement happened in the state of Colorado. And I had seen another counselor liaison who had been the liaison to that commission prior to me and was shooting down harm reduction in Loveland, basically speaking for all of us and all of city council. And I thought, well, that's not right. I don't know that all of city council and all of Loveland agree with that. And so I actually wanted to be a different kind of representative on that commission. And so that's why I'm on that one. I used to be on the Summit Zone Advisory Council for 7 years. I was a member, educator, volunteer with NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, because my lived experience is I have a son with a co-occurring disorder, and that's severe mental illness and drug abuse. He was also an IV meth user. So that's why I'm here. I serve on the state of Colorado's Behavioral Health Policy Council. That's a SAMHSA block grant that we're helping figure out how to allocate funds. And so I see a lot of familiar faces in here. Folks that are running sober living homes and doing the work. And so I appreciate all of you because you've helped mine out over the years, or someone like you has. And so I'm not up here as Councilor Black, I'm up here as Erin Black.
Yep.
To be sure, however, every decision that I make, this is the lens I'm looking through. Because I can't say that I have lived experience as far as an addiction, as far as that goes, but I can tell you I needed a community because the family got diagnosed. This is a community diagnosis, a family diagnosis, and it's gonna take all of us to support each other through it. So as much as our folks in recovery and those maybe not ready or thinking about it, wherever you're at on the scale, we need the support to the families and the loved ones, because it's hard to watch you guys go down that road. In fact, my son's in drug court right now. Because there was another relapse, and you know, I guess that is supposed to continue to happen. And for our family, as long as there's life, there's hope. So he's still alive.
That's right.
So we're still.
And thank you for talking about it.
Yeah.
You know, just thank you for talking about it. Hey, Gordon, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Gordon McLaughlin. I'm the Larimer County District Attorney. Really happy to be here. I don't have anything prepared. I mainly sort of want to interact and hear people. I mean, I think the Loveland Voices is important because it's important for me as an elected official to hear the voices of folks in our community. I'm on our regional opioid abatement committee as well. That we've done a lot of the things you've already heard about, so I won't repeat all those, but that's really important work for me. I'm also on our statewide essentially version of that committee, which is the pot of money that the Attorney General's office has to do some statewide initiatives, mainly for things like education and treatment. That's where the Colorado Connect program came out of that some might be familiar with. That's the new sort of childhood education initiative on opioids and fentanyl that I think is really fantastic, and we're doing some other stuff like that. But you know, my philosophy as district attorney is that you know, drug use and addiction really is a behavioral health issue, and we are trying to treat that in every way possible as a behavioral health issue, and make sure that we're trying to separate folks that are distributing drugs and victimizing the community from those that are victims of this opioid epidemic and other drugs. And so we're doing our best to do that. I hear from folks like MJ and Shane often on these various committees, and always appreciate that. You know, it's really important for us to stay grounded and in touch with our community and understand some of these issues, even if they're not issues to us personally, and to come out and learn about those. So I appreciate all the input from them and others on many committees. You know, one thing I just heard from the last panel, and I didn't know this gentleman before, was, you know, hey, addiction doesn't end in 30 days, right? We're not, we don't just come out and live a perfect life. It's a struggle and it's hard. And so that's important for my folks to know. My whole staff, attorneys, investigators, victim advocates, everyone we have went through a harm reduction program maybe 6 or so months ago with the North Colorado Health Alliance, and got trained on what harm reduction was. And that is not something that most DA's offices know anything about or have heard about. They couldn't even explain that concept. But I want my folks to understand what people are going through before they're dealing with what is the most important thing usually in a defendant's life or in a victim's life when they're coming into the criminal justice system. And they also train us all on Narcan use. So we're trained in Narcan use. They passed out Narcan. We have Narcan. A lot of folks choose to carry it or keep it in their desks or cars. I have it in my car and in my house because you never know when you're going to need that. And as public servants, right, we care very deeply about this community. We want to help this community. We want to save lives, and that is a big part of what we do. So my mandate is community safety, but in addition to what we're doing in the office with, you know, in-office policy, a lot of what I can do in my role in the bully pulpit I have as an elected official is to say, hey, if we're also serious about community safety, which is my bottom line, we need to address the root causes of crime that bring people into the criminal justice system. That's not always addiction or behavioral health, but certainly plenty of times it is. And so if we do want to solve some of those issues, we have to be serious about this, and that's where some of these committees that we're on come into play. And so I'm trying to voice that to folks that probably don't have the same perspective on addiction that people in this room have, and try to explain the importance of that from other factors that people might consider important as well.
So Gordon, so do you think, like in a nutshell, do you think that criminalizing addiction is working?
I don't think many people could agree that that's working. You know, I think people don't know what else to do sometimes, and so that's one of the things that I try to push back on. Okay, well, we might not have a great solution. What is this solving? You know, I'm not advocating for decriminalization, but I am advocating, and what we do in our office is try to look at every other possible option. And so when someone comes in on a case that is just a drug possession case or a drug use case, we are looking at treatment options 10 times out of 10. And so for someone to you know, make sure those opportunities are not just available, but, you know, hitting people in the face level available, so that those are what is offered. We do have other, you know, and that can come all sorts of levels. We have diversionary programs, which means someone can participate in that diversion program. Maybe that just means take a few classes, do a few things, and actually have that case dismissed. We have what's called deferred judgments, which is sort of the next level up, a little bit longer, but eventually you can have that case dismissed, because I do not want folks going through life with convictions for something like drug use that may cause them to not be able to get a student loan or a house or a job or something like that. That's not helping them, but it's not helping the community either. And then all the way up to drug court, right, which is a really, really robust program. That's a difficult program for sure, but also can help people, and it's usually helping people that, you know, have issues that have evolved beyond just drug use, right? It's trying to solve some bigger problems, and it's definitely a tough program, but it's an effective program for the right population. And the people in that's also a big group of folks. There's one DA representative, but it's a big group of folks from the treatment community, from other places, trying to make sure that we are getting resources to someone to solve the problem.
Erin, will you answer a question
Sure.
about safe needle havens and needle change programs? How do you feel as a city councilor and personally about seeing those in Loveland?
Well, when I talk to the folks that work in that field, and they tell me that, and we have data that shows that it's effective. It meets people where they are, it opens a window, there's a connection piece there. And so I don't think it's go use, we're encouraging to, let me help you. But it's also lowering the risk of spreading other diseases. And so it's a health and safety issue for the entire community. So I truly believe that we need more of that in Loveland. And now that I'm the liaison, I'll be in complete support of that. So.
Do you have anything to say about that,
So once upon a time, I started my career in HIV prevention, which means that I was doing a lot of work with our LGBTQ community and doing education, doing testing, all of that jazz. But also, that means that I was operating a syringe access program. So I do have some things to talk about. And what people find at syringe access programs is something entirely unique, and that is unabashed lack of judgment, lack of stigma, compassion, and just support in a way that you don't see in a lot of organizations. It's powerful, powerful work that comes out of those spaces. Now, the data also shows that folks who access syringe access programs are 5 times more likely to enter treatment and recovery than those who do not. 5 times more likely than those who do not. It is an asset to the community. There's also data that demonstrates there's less syringes in communities that have syringe access programs. There's also data that demonstrates that people feel cared for, connected, we heard how important that was, supported, and in a space of safety. All of those things showed up in all of our stories. That is so critical to changing the culture of a community. Additionally, the data shows that you have 50% reduction in HIV and hepatitis C cases in communities that have syringe access programs. You gotta do it. You gotta.
Are we listening? Okay, I have a question from the audience for
Anybody.
Okay. John Mallow.
I want to say, wow, who's that? Thank you all, I appreciate it. I have a question for anybody that can help me. If you haven't noticed, I'm an old white guy.
Never noticed.
And we're hard to turn, right? And we kind of set in our ways over the years. And I wanted Council's has taken a diversity track. It's different. We used to be a bunch of old white guys. Now we got some young, aggressive progressives. And I just love that. And I'm trying to keep up with them. Which I can't, but I'm trying to. So what does any old white guy do when they need help? They call Shane. So I contacted Shane and said, Shane, I need some education. Please help me out here. And we met, and he gave me, what I wanted at the time was, is there a problem? What is the problem? Is it real? And what are the touch points and all that kind of stuff? I've moved on down to what, I'm not an expert by no means, but I want to move on to how to help people that need help in this area. So is there anything you folks could point me to in terms of reading? Old white guys read. So if you can point me to any books or periodic documentaries that I can use to help educate other people as well as potentially in my role help citizens.
I'll be quick. Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. It was super powerful to have John reach out and be open to some education. And it looks like maybe I convinced you there's a problem, that it's real.
It's a problem.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you for being solution oriented. I just finished a book. I'm going to forget the name of the author. It's called The Urge, Our History of Addiction. For anyone interested in how addiction has developed, all the way from the etymology of the word, through the stigma, through policy, etc., read The Urge, Our History of Addiction. It's powerful, it's impactful, it's actually a really good read, and it's written by a man in recovery who is also an MD, who works in the field. So that would be my recommendation.
I would say go to the Recovery Research Institute and just dive deep. All of it's there.
Okay. Questions out here for anyone? Gordon, Erin, MJ, Rasheen, Sarah?
Yeah, of course. Hello.
So I work for Boys and Girls Clubs of Larimer County, and because of that Attorney General's funding, we are about to start our very first ever youth opioid prevention program because of the grant funding. And I was actually working on the materials for that just like last week, so we're gonna roll it out here pretty soon. And we were able to find some really awesome programs online that focused on different age groups. There's even programming for elementary school kids on what medication is and how to ensure you're being careful with it. So I really appreciate that because this is the first time we've ever even considered or been able to do such programming.
Wow, that's amazing.
I have a request, MJ, if you could quickly explain how Narcan works and if people want to pick it up, like how they use it maybe. I think people feel a little intimidated.
Yes. So, first of all, if you use Narcan and you're wrong, you're not going to hurt anyone. That is a key takeaway. Okay? Ultimately, you are looking for the symptoms of shutdown. Shame. Thank you. So, signs of an opioid overdose include that this person is maybe clammy or moist to the touch. We love the word moist. They are not breathing. Their heart may not be beating, or it is really tethered. Breathing, and additionally, they're non-responsive, right? You shake them, you can't get any response from them. So ultimately, if you walk up to somebody or someone in your world is seeing or experiencing those symptoms, we want you to try and raise consciousness, right? Give them a shake. You can also use the back of your knuckles and rub that right on their sternum. That is gonna hurt but not harm them. We don't want you to slap, kick, punch, throw them in an ice bath, any of that. Just do a sternum rub, okay? If you get a response, you don't need Narcan. Now, obviously, if you're seeing that person experiencing those symptoms, they might need medical attention for a different reason, or might not be in full overdose at that juncture. That said, if you don't get a response, then you will get your Narcan kit. In each of these boxes over to my left, there are 2 doses. We want you to start with 1 dose. So these are blister pouches. There's a little pull tab on the back. You just open that. Do it. Do it, Shane. Yeah. In case you forget everything we talked about, the directions are in the blister pouch. Incredible.
Unfold for direction.
Unfold for directions.
Thank you.
You are then going to take your Narcan nasal spray and put your fingers on both sides of the nose piece and your thumb on the button on the bottom. I'm not going to have Shane put this in my nose, but when you do go to do that, I know, you're disappointed. You're going to put your fingers flush to their nostril. That's how you know you've made it far enough into their nose, okay? And then he's doing it. Incredible. I'm glad he's not doing it tonight. It'd be hard to talk during that time. You're going to push the button once. Okay, that is it. You push the button once, and then that Narcan is going to get absorbed into their mucous membranes. a person does not need to be breathing for Narcan to work because of the mucous membranes. If you think about it, if not breathing is one of the symptoms, we made the antidote to this, require breathing, we'd kind of be in trouble, right? So that is totally going to work. Again, that is a blister pouch, so you don't have to remove any other packaging. After you have opened that, do not pull it apart, there is no cap. Do not prime the pump, this is not Flonase, okay? Once you push that button, that's your dose, okay? So Narcan should work within 2 to 3 minutes. If after 2 to 3 minutes it hasn't worked, that's when you open your second blister pouch and you hit them in the other nostril, okay? Same process. At this point, if you feel comfortable, we do want you to be calling 911, right? This person hasn't been breathing, right? So I always say to do these 2 steps in the order that makes sense. So if you've got your phone, call 911 and go find your Narcan. But if you've got your Narcan and not your phone, give them Narcan and then go find your phone, okay? So order of operations, excellent. It is easier to respond to an overdose with more than one person, but if it is just you, you're gonna be okay, okay? When you are on the line with dispatch, if you do call 911, they're gonna ask you where you are, and they're gonna ask you what you're seeing, right? They're also gonna stay on the line with you, which is great. So describe what you see. This person's not breathing, their skin is turning blue or ashen, they're not responsive. They're gonna send one of these fine things. I did that, in case you're wondering. That was Shane, sorry. But ultimately, they are gonna wait on the line with you, and if you're comfortable, they'll walk you through chest compressions and rescue breaths as well. If you're certified, you can be doing that as well, or if you're comfortable following those directions with dispatch, they will, again, help you, okay? If you have to leave that person for whatever reason, let's say you do have to go run and find your phone, get them on their side in what's called the rescue position. This is the same position we put people in if they're not feeling well from drinking too much. People understand that comparison. Ultimately, the goal is to make sure they don't choke on their vomit, okay? Because it is possible for them to be vomiting in this situation. Additionally, if you don't feel comfortable calling 911, for whatever reason, maybe you got a pending court case with Gordon, right? Or you don't have a super extreme trust with law enforcement for whatever reason, we still want you to find help some way. So this was a concern that came up when I was working in syringe access, still comes up with clients today. And we're asking them to say, hey, can you throw your buddy in the car and drive him to the emergency room if you're not comfortable calling EMS? Can you call them an Uber? Can you call them a Lyft and ride with them if you don't have a vehicle? Like, let's get creative so that this person can access medical support, because when we aren't breathing, our brain is hurting, our heart is hurting, our lungs are hurting, and those aren't necessarily things we feel in that moment, but do have repercussions later on. Another note, and then I will leave it be. Narcan works for 30 to 90 minutes. So your timer starts, okay? Why that happens is Narcan works in the opioid receptors in our brain, and it blocks them. It kicks the opioid off the receptor and blocks that receptor for that time. The opioids haven't left our body, they're still there. So when the Narcan wears off, those opioids will reattract to those receptors and cause that person to potentially go back into overdose. So we really want to make sure, if, again, they don't go to the emergency room, they at least have a buddy, they at least have somebody with another Narcan kit to maintain safety today.
So, such good information. Do you know if you can leave Narcan like in your car? Is it sensitive to temperature, sunlight, that kind of thing?
I can. That was aggressive. So the research shows that you can leave your Narcan in your car in the hot of the summer, in the cold of the winter. There are temperature ranges on your box that you walk away from today, and John Hopkins has proven them wrong, okay? Those studies were done on kids that were left in first responders vehicles, and still overwhelmingly effective. Additionally, there is an expiration date on those boxes. Again, John Hopkins showing up, doing the research, and I'm telling you, please don't throw your kid away if it's expired. The FDA actually just increased the expiration range to an additional 40 years beyond the expiration that's written on the box. And John Hopkins actually says, you got 30 years, friends, okay? So please don't throw your kid away. If you're working in a space that has an expired kit and by policy, they need a fresh one, that's okay. You can contact us and we'll recycle it in the community. Okay?
Awesome, thank you. Lynn here has a question.
Actually, can I tag something on real quick? Gordon, could you speak on what a typical law enforcement response might be in our region in an overdose situation?
Yeah, thank you, Shane. Well, first, I'd say for those that don't know how to use the Narcan, I've been trained. If they can train a room full of prosecutors to use it, everyone's smart enough to figure out how to use it. So it really is surprisingly simple. So I would encourage folks to sort of spread that message that how simple it is and error-proof it is. So an important factor that I did want to bring up, right, is I understand there is distrust of law enforcement. I get that. In fact, I just brought that up in a meeting right the other week, and I saw vigorous agreement coming from MJ on that. So I'm aware of it. There's obviously historical reasons that exists, that are true. Currently, there are provisions to provide immunity for use if you're calling in an overdose in 911, right? Our goal is not to be prosecuting someone for drug use when they're trying to save a life. Of course, that's not immunity from everything, right? If they show up and you've got a couple dead bodies buried in your basement, you don't get immunity for that. But our goal is not to prosecute people for that. We want to save lives, and so I really, really encourage people to call in and to get that done. Another thing that happens is, when someone does die, unfortunately, of an overdose, and probably folks in this room know that happens all too frequently. There's now a law in the books that says we can prosecute those cases like homicides, and our goal is to look at the high-level dealers that are prosecuting those. And so people will get those questions if there's an overdose, not because we're trying to prosecute the friend who called 911, but instead we're trying to prosecute the people bringing in fentanyl into our community. And that's always going to be our goal. That's what the law is designed for, and so I certainly encourage people to reach out. Shane, did that answer the question?
Yes.
All right, Lynn Reynolds has a question.
As a retired health professional, I've been trained how to do CPR. I'm a little confused. You're suggesting to just give the Narcan and go through everything else I was trained after that, correct? That would be the first step with the Narcan?
Yes, and the reason for that, and I know this goes backwards, is because that Narcan is going to be the quickest way to get that person's breath back.
And if I'm wrong with it not being an overdose, that Narcan will not affect that person?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Kat McManus with a question. So we do talk about the distrust that we have with the police. I am one of them. I have a lot of distrust with police officers, and they are not the first person I want to call in those situations. We have street outreach programs that are starting, and to me, I feel safer to call an EMT. I feel safer to call a firefighter before I call a police officer. And I'm wondering, what are we gonna start doing to help that middle ground with those outreach programs to encourage what kind of telephone number are we gonna do to be able to have a direct contact that is like the police, that we can have those hotlines? Because again, I don't want to call the police. I don't trust the system. I don't trust what cop is going to be on the scene, because they're always different. And to me, I have more trust in the outreach programs, and I'm wondering why we're not pushing those harder, especially for Loveland, because we do have a program, from what I understand, in Fort Collins.
Because we live in Loveland.
Well, I'll probably give it to Councilor Black at some point about Loveland specifically. But let me just say real quick, I understand that. My suggestion to call is certainly not a suggestion not to call EMTs or fire or some outreach program first. Those are all great programs. I wholeheartedly support those programs. I've been pounding the drum on co-responder programs as loud as I can because a police officer is not the best person to respond to plenty of situations, right? Police responders are not trained in behavioral health. And so there's often situations where others will be able to assist. And I'm a huge supporter of those programs. We funded some of them through and I always get all these acronyms wrong. What council are we on? Yeah, one of the councils. I don't say that to dismiss it. It's really important. Just the acronyms get switched in my head. So we funded some of that. I think those are really important. They're going to de-escalate situations. They're going to provide better care. They're going to provide better advice in certain situations. And so I think those are really important. The other thing to keep in mind is that to your question about you don't know which officer will show up or what that person's perspective will be. I get that. I can't answer that problem for you. I mean, in Larimer County, we have something like 500-600 sworn police officers. So that's a lot of different people with realistically, as in any profession, different perspectives on things. However, the ultimate decision on whether to pursue a crime is going to be a district attorney's office decision. And so if something does come in, if an officer does say, hey, I'm gonna arrest this person in this case for fentanyl possession, ultimately that comes in office and is reviewed. Now that doesn't mean that there's no harm in the meantime when someone's arrested. An arrest is a really serious and sometimes life-altering action in and of itself. So I get that. However, there is a review by our office. We're always the one in charge of that final decision on a case.
Well, and I'll add to that, Kat. So it depends on the situation. I've had to call 911 and it was just an EMS issue, just a medical issue to do with the drug effects. I've also had to call 911 because there was violence or destruction of property or threats or I don't know. So that's a different kind of call. And in that call, you let them know I'm dealing with a person who's either actively having a psychosis or actively using, or they have no weapons, and you give them as much information as you possibly can. And yeah, there were times that I was, hopeful that the squad car that showed up had their CIT training, and didn't have a grudge against folks that were in the middle of a crisis. And so I think it depends on the call. We do have more folks in mobile crisis units and co-responders and officers that have CIT training now than say when my son's issues first started 14 and a half years ago. Things have changed big time since then. We didn't have any of it. There wasn't one co-responder. And so things have come a long way, and I think dispatch has come a long way as well, because when you call, they're really the person that's determining how they're funneling out that call. But it's helpful. We were always told to have a crisis plan. And so if you have a loved one that has an addiction and or a mental illness, I would encourage you, have those numbers in your phone. Educate yourself on what to say if you have to call 911, because that can save a life.
Okay, Terrell, do you have a question?
Hi there. I guess this is, can you all hear me? A part of my story, my last day using, I was on meth and I was arrested for being naked in a hotel. I was in psychosis, and I'm smiling because it makes me nervous sharing that in front of real people. But the police were called, and instead of going to a mental health facility, I was taken to jail, and I still have a charge on my record for that. And I'm not going to get into whether that's right or wrong, but with new facilities opening up in Larimer County, like Longview, right, like detox facilities, mental crisis stabilization units. I'm curious from kind of like the top down, like district attorney wise, how messaging is being sent to police officers regarding alternatives to jail in those sorts of situations.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for it. Yeah, the Longview facility is terrific. One of the things that frankly spurred me to run for district attorney was when Longview was put on the ballot the first time and it failed, and no one in law enforcement spoke up and said this is something we need. I thought that was just completely inexcusable. It's absolutely something we need and something that is going to benefit community safety. It's going to take folks out of jails when they don't need to be there and put them in a crisis unit or behavioral health unit that's going to be able to help them. So I think Longview is terrific, and there's people in this room that have worked on that. Good for them. It's a great facility. Since it opened, or right before it opened, I've toured it with all the chiefs of police. So they're very aware. I know that they're sort of rolling it out slowly because they're opening it up wing by wing out at Longview, so they don't have all the bed space yet. And so they're sort of telling law enforcement, like, don't bring everyone in Laramie County here tomorrow. So it's a slow rollout, but they're aware. I know the co-responder units of most of the agencies are already using it quite a bit, and with great success is my understanding. I had, in terms of what the messaging is, I had the Longview folks come to my all-staff meeting just a couple of weeks ago and explain to, again, the whole office, what is Longview, what do we do, when can we be useful, and I really challenged my folks to use this resource because we're really lucky in Larimer County to have a resource like Longview. I mean, for folks that don't know, it is really almost unique within the country to have such a large, robust, well-funded, county-funded facility. And so we'd be fools to not use that to the greatest extent we can. And so it's new, so I don't necessarily know exactly how we're going to use it yet, but I've challenged my folks, when a defendant, if that person's pro se representing themselves, or a defense attorney comes and says, hey, here's the plan. I know they did XYZ that potentially constituted a crime, is unacceptable. They want to get better, they want to get help, they have a plan, they're going to Longview, they're going to get stable, they're going to get on an exit plan with medication or treatment or whatever that may be. Let's really consider those as new options that are available to us that just didn't exist 2 months ago. So it's definitely in its infancy, but I know that we believe very strongly in it. The DA's office, I do, and from my end, I don't speak for any of the chiefs of police, but my understanding is they're all excited for the resource as well.
Well, if I can add, I asked our chief of police that very question last night at our city council meeting. And just like the DA said, right now co-responders are allowed to bring patients to Longview, but they are telling law enforcement themselves, if they don't have a co-responder with them, to hold off right now because they're slowly opening up more levels of that facility. He did say that a lot of the officers have had the tour, Loveland officers, and that they will be working on that. I think there's gonna be some kinks along the way. My son, the last time he was arrested, he was in a meth psychosis as well, and he went to jail and didn't know where he was at. Should have been a facility as well. So there's work to be done, and again, it's new, so I think our officers, it's gonna take some time for everybody, and so there'll be some mistakes, there'll be some mishaps, and we're gonna have to have some grace along the way. Thanks for the question.
I think we're gonna have to wrap it up. I think we could talk about this forever. I mean, it's just a continuing conversation. So thank you everyone that spoke tonight. And I'm sure some of these folks will be around for a few minutes if you have anything you want to talk to about. Thank you, Sarah McKean, for coming. Thank you, John Mallow, for coming.